Pablo Escobar Gaviria is a name that needs no introduction in the narcotics world, or any world at all. But if there's ever a need to introduce the most popular Colombian in the world, we know one man who can do it without faltering because he knows Pablo in a way nobody else does. Roberto Escobar Gaviria, nicknamed El Osito, the Little Bear, a name from his days as a cyclist, was not only Pablo's older brother but also his confidant, and the man entrusted with keeping track of Medellin's multi-billion-dollar annual income. This is a story of brotherhood that began ordinarily before it was covered in a cloud of coke, smeared with blood, and strengthened with money. Give this video a quick thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more fantastic content. 2 years before the birth of Pablo Escobar, Abel de Jesus Dari Escobar Echeverri, a farmer, and his wife, Hermilda de los Dolores Gaviria Berrio, an elementary school teacher, gave birth to Roberto de Jesus Escobar Gaviria on a small cattle ranch in the town of Rio Negro in Colombia's department of Antioquia on the 13th of January 1947. They were products of modest beginnings. The boys helped their father out in his ranch and lived in a one-bedroom house where they shared 2 mattresses with their parents and their sister, Luz Maria, in their one-bedroom house. But soon, their herd was wiped out by a disease, and the family was rocked by a financial earthquake that made them bankrupt. Later, they were the targets of a raid by guerrillas who threatened to burn down their entire household. The rebels suspected their father's political involvement due to his town's liberal learnings and were planning to kill him if not for the timely intervention of the Colombian army that saved the Escobars from catastrophe. The attack forced the boys out of their home as they were sent to live with their grandparents in Medellin, the capital city of Antioquia province. Roberto was only 5 at the time, and along with his younger brother, he spent his adolescence and pubertal years in the city. The relationship of the brothers was one of adoration and respect as the younger Escobar worshipped his older brother. Roberto had a dream of becoming a professional cyclist, and Pablo rode beside him on the journey, washing his bicycle, preparing his uniform before races, and rallying for supporters to cheer on his brother during races. But Roberto would eventually drop the two-wheeler for a degree in accounting. He described young Pablo as a very ambitious child who was determined more than anything to be wealthy, and he once said he would kill himself if he wasn't a millionaire in US dollars by the age of 22. In 1972, money trouble compelled young Pablo to drop out of Medellin's Universidad Autónoma Latinoamericana, where he was studying, and ushered him into a new arena where he began building his criminal empire. Initially, it was the illegal cigarettes, counterfeit lottery tickets, and vehicular theft. Then, marijuana, a popular recreational drug at the time. But his foresight delivered the American narcotics market into his hands in the late 1970s, when US authorities thought heroin was a real threat. Escobar's Medellin Cartel emerged as the North American country's #1 supplier, responsible for over 80% of America's cocaine imports. The money was coming in plenty and fast, and the man in charge of keeping it was Pablo's head accountant and right-hand man, Roberto Escobar Gaviria, who claimed the cartel invested about $2,500 on rubber bands to hold all the money in place. But it was so much that they had to bury most of it in the grounds of the countryside, which caused the loss of about 10% of their earnings to mold and rats. One incident that proved the extent of Escobar's wealth was the incredible tale of how Roberto threw $100,000 contained in a briefcase into a river because its weight was slowing him down while he was fleeing from the authorities. Pablo ruled the Colombian narcotics industry with an iron fist. He was known for his Plata Lomo, aka silver or lead policy, that offered law enforcement and government officials the 2 options of a bribe or a bullet. But after Pablo's ejection from Colombia's legislative floors by oppositions who pointed him out as a scoundrel, he proceeded to wage a war to force the Colombian government to succumb to his demands against the extradition of Colombians to the US. His campaign of terror was aided by his criminal band of narcos called Les Extraditables and enforced by its private army and sponsored guerrilla groups. It was a war that claimed the lives of several innocent Colombians while the Escobar brothers were on the run and wanted by the FBI with a $10 million bounty on their heads. One of the biggest attacks attributed to Escobar was the out-of-the-sky bombing of a passenger plane that killed 107 people in 1989. In June 1991, Escobar agreed to a surrender deal with the Colombian government after the prohibition of extradition was included in the 1991 Colombian Constitution, and Roberto was there with Pablo at La Catedral, a private prison the drug lord built to serve his sentence, until July 22, 1992. After the brutal execution of Fernando Galeano and Gerardo Moncada, the news of his continued criminal activities forced then-president Cesar Gaviria to propose their movement out of the complex, which was more of a resort than a penitentiary, to a proper jail. Roberto, Pablo, and their Sicarios, who guarded the facility, evaded arrest by the advancing military forces and went into hiding. This started a manhunt carried out by all the enemies of Pablo Escobar, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, the Search Block, and Los Pepes, which was sponsored by Escobar's rivals in Cali. Eventually, on the 2nd of December 1993, a day after his birthday, Escobar was sniffed out and shot dead on the roof in Los Olivos, a middle-class barrio in Medellin. Roberto was left with no other choice but to turn himself over to the authorities in 1993. He served 14 years for his involvement with the Medellin Cartel and was freed in 2006 on December 18, 1993, while behind bars in the Tagui Maximum Security Prison. He received a letter bomb that blinded him in his right eye and deafened his left ear. Since his release, Roberto joined many other people affiliated to the Escobar name, who have been profiting from the posthumous explosion of Pablo's popularity. While he's not been selling Escobar-branded shirts on the streets of Medellin, he has been dabbling in a variety of businesses through Escobar Incorporated, a holding company he created in 1984 to launder his brother's enormous wealth, but is now used to license his family's name and roll out new business ideas. The company's portfolio now includes a telephone company that launched a foldable phone in 2019 and his narco-tourism venture, where he takes curious visitors on tours of one of the hideouts he shared with Pablo in Medellin and regales them with stories of his adventures from his days as Medellin Cartel's financial manager. The museum-like edifice sits on the hillside in Medellin. It has safe rooms equipped with breathing equipment where they could hide for long periods and a terrace that looks like an airport from where Pablo could see his money as it arrived in planes from the US. The house features some of Escobar's old cars, and the walls are adorned with photographs of the brothers from their better days. Escobar's story has been the object of a long list of Hollywood adaptations, but Wagner Moura's portrayal of the Kingpin in Netflix's Narcos has been the source of his resurgent popularity. Roberto spent a lifetime with Pablo Escobar, who was featured on Forbes' list of the richest men in the world in the 80s and 90s, and he's now gaining notoriety for requesting billions from multinationals. First was Netflix in 2016. Through Escobar Incorporated, Roberto demanded reparations for the unapproved appropriation of his family's story. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, he threatened to close their little show if they failed to pay him $1 billion. In 2018, he launched an alternative Bitcoin called Diet Bitcoin, DDX, and wrote about its strengths in a book titled Pablo Escobar's Diet Bitcoin. In 2019, he started a GoFundMe account for former American President Donald Trump's impeachment. In 2020, he sued Apple for $2.6 billion for a bug on his iPhone X that he claimed allowed someone to send him a life-threatening letter in January of 2019. He has also published 2 memoirs on his brother and his time as the cartel's manager, titled The Accountant's Story: Inside the Violent World of Medellin Cartel and Escobar, the inside story of Pablo Escobar, the world's most powerful criminal. Although Roberto Escobar Gaviria wasn't known to participate in the violent portions of the Medellin Cartel's dealings, he was the hand that counted the billions that were made from a trade that was ensured by taking the lives of multitudes. It was these billions that afforded him the luxury of flying on private jets, dining with superstars, educating his kids in Swiss boarding schools, and living a life of royalty. So his complicity in the creation of one of the world's best-known criminals is inexorable, and the world will remember him not as just another Roberto Escobar, but as the man who stood beside Pablo Escobar Gaviria while he flooded America with white powder, blew innocent people out of the sky, and held the country and its people hostage. What do you think about Pablo's brother? Leave a comment below, like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more.